Well, first of all, I want to thank you very much for giving up your evening to come hear me. It's not that often I get to talk to a bunch of people who are interested in history. And I will go over the Preparedness Day bombing just very quickly. My most recent book is The Matter of the Vanishing Greyhound. I do impossible crimes. Impossible crimes is where something happens and the detective has to figure out how it happened as well as to catch the bad guys. In this particular case, you have a Greyhound bus full of hostages and bank robbers. The cops are following them. The Greyhound bus drives off onto the Golden Gate Bridge and disappears. So now the detective has to figure out how the Greyhound bus disappears and still has to catch the bad guys. There are 20 copies of the book back there. These are all donations to the IHS, so write your check to them. They gave me a small grant to be here, and I'm very pleased to be here, and this is one of my ways of paying them back. The little bit of a background, the Preparedness Day bombing was my master's thesis back a long time ago, and at that time nobody had ever heard of it, even in the 1970s. And,
go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
Go ahead.
And I went through most of the original documents. It's one of those events in history that people didn't really look at because nothing spectacular came about it. And after doing the research, I did find quite a bit of stuff, and we will finish up at the last part of this as why this is incredibly important today. The most important thing that I want to tell you at the start is also the most important thing I want to tell you at the end, and that is history is not the story of the past, it's not the study of the future, it is a tool. It's like money and time. If you use it properly, you will profit. If you don't, you'll keep making the same mistakes everybody else is making over and over and over again. So if you don't learn from history, you're going to keep repeating the same stupid things. A good example, and since we're talking about the Preparedness Day bombing, I'm going to take you back to 1912. This is 4 years before the Preparedness Day bombing. It's exactly like it is today. You have a middle class and a working class that are making absolutely no money. You've got a war going on and starting up in Europe. You're going to have 60 million people in uniform, and everyone in Europe that is going into the military has been pulled off a farm or has been pulled out of a factory. And every time you pull someone off a farm or pull somebody out of a factory, there's one less person growing food and one less person making boots and shirts and whatever. And everybody in the army has to eat every day, and you need food. And if the Europeans aren't growing it, they're going to have to buy it from somebody. And so they're buying it from the United States. So the United States, we are selling all kinds of things to Europe, but as we're selling all kinds of things to Europe, 100% of what we are producing is going to Europe. As a result, what happens is when you talk about boots, all of a sudden you are having all of these boots that were going on to the American market are now going to the European market, which means there's a lot less boots on the market. That means you have inflation, and starting in 1912, you're going to see inflation for the first time in almost 50 years since the Civil War. And we're talking in San Francisco, the inflation rate is going up at about 12 to 15% per year in 1912, 13, 14, 15, and 16. And why is this important? Is because by 1916, the unions are struggling to survive. And they're going in and they're asking for raises of 15%. And the businesses are saying, not only are we not going to pay you 15%, we're not going to pay you anything. And that is because we want to make an open shop. We want San Francisco to be an open shop city. And this is happening all across the country. All across the country, unions are asking for more money, and the employers are saying not only we're not going to give you money, we want to have an open shop nation. Today it's called the right to work. We don't want the unions, we want the unions gone. And you're going to break into the most violent era of American history. People talk, I was listening to Donald Trump last night talking about how the violence going on. This is what's going on today is nothing compared between 1910 and 1920. In October of 1910, you have 3 union radicals that take dynamite sticks. They go into the Los Angeles Times building in Los Angeles. They wrap it around a natural gas pipe, set it off, and you talk about a 3-story building that is completely blown up. That's the Los Angeles Times building. It covers a block, a city block, and it blows up. 21 people are killed in that accident. And the accident, that bombing, excuse me. At the end of the era, 1920, this is the Wall Street bombing. Somebody drove a wagon with 100 pounds of dynamite and 500 pounds of nails and screws and set it off at noon. You got 21 people killed. One of the people who almost got killed was a guy by the name of Joe Kennedy. Had Joe Kennedy been walking to lunch 5 seconds earlier, he would have been killed in the blast. 7 days after the Preparedness Day bombing is the Black Tom bombing. And the Black Tom bombing is one of those bombings that is stranger than fiction, and no matter how I tried to explain it to you, you would think I was lying. So if you will look on your chair, you will see that I've got a handout, and there's some handouts on the Black Tom bombing. It's 2 million pounds of dynamite that's set off with fake cigars, and it's part of what's called the Annie Laurie Affair. And the Annie Laurie Affair was the longest, most expensive trial in American history here in San Francisco in 1917. And it's referred to as the Hindu-German conspiracy, which involves a political party in India with the Irish Republican Army and the German Imperial Army. I mean, the Wikipedia is there. You look at it, you're going, you know, if I had told you that without the Wikipedia, you would have looked at me like, you know, Steve, they're legalizing marijuana in Alaska, and you never know what kind of strange things will come out of your mouth when you're doing that. The Black Tom explosion is so large, it's out off the coast of New Jersey, that the explosion itself was felt in Philadelphia. That's how big we're talking about here. San Francisco starts out, this is Fickert, Charles Fickert. Charles Fickert is the district attorney here in San Francisco in 1916. And he is in bed with the Chamber of Commerce, and he is, in the Chamber of Commerce, are looking at going ahead and tearing apart the unions. The biggest problem that they have in San Francisco in 1916 is the unions are not getting wage increases, and so you begin having strikes. And by 1916, you have about a dozen active strikes. You have Teamsters are on strike, stevedores, longshoremen, restaurants, structural steel, lumber yards, everybody. You've got strikes all over the city. You have got beatings up all over the city. The San Francisco police cannot keep up with the beatings, and so the Chamber of Commerce, question? I'm beg your pardon? 1916, right. You're right. Okay. No problem. In 1916, what happens is you've got a dozen strikes in San Francisco, and everybody is trying to deal with the unions. The unions are not dealing with the managers at all, and the Chamber of Commerce comes in and says, we've got this great idea. They say this to the employers. Why don't you guys all get together and let us negotiate with the unions? And the first thing that the management said is we can't do that is because we'd have to have strikebreakers. And the labor union and the Chamber of Commerce says, we've got a better idea than that. We're going to ship in several hundred strikebreakers. We're going to pay for them to come in. We're going to have our own union, a union of non-union people. And every time there's a strike, what we'll do is we'll replace your strikers, you know, with these non-union with these union strikebreakers. And what's called the American Stevedore Company. And it's very effective. It's very effective because every time the unions went on strike, they were able to replace the strikers with strikebreakers. And one at a time, what is happening is that the unions are being squeezed out of the labor market. Why? Because the Chamber of Commerce is moving strikebreakers in. Okay, it is a very uneasy time in San Francisco because you've got all kinds of people who are unemployed, who are supposed to be striking and are striking, but all of the industries that are in are still operating. Okay, at that time, every time that a union member is arrested, what happens is Fickert will make sure that they go to jail. So what happens is you're also cleaning off the streets of your strikebreakers. Strikers, I'm sorry. At the same time, what's going on in America right now is these companies that are selling to the Germans and all of the European countries, they're making all kinds of money. You have a president in there, Woodrow Wilson. Woodrow Wilson is talking about being neutral. Well, if you are making all kinds of money and the president says that we should be neutral, that means that you've got to give up all of these multi-million-dollar contracts. Are you going to do that? No, you're not going to do that. So what happens is Woodrow Wilson gets caught in this bind. Is on one hand, he can't say we're going to be neutral because all of the people who are giving money to politicians are making millions and millions of dollars. They're not going to stop making the boots and the guns and the food and everything else and selling it to the Germans. And on the other hand, everybody is talking about, are we going to go to war? Do we going to have to send our boys overseas? Woodrow Wilson doesn't want to say yes. So he's got to say something, so he does the old side slip. And the side slip is, you're not going to say yes or no. What you're going to do is come up with something else that changes the conversation. And the change to the conversation became preparedness. We weren't going to talk about going to war. We weren't going to talk about not going to war. We weren't going to talk about not selling to the Allies or the Axis. What we're going to do is, all across America, we are going to show everybody that we are prepared. And we're going to show we're prepared by having a parade. Okay, I don't know what anybody expected that to do, except it was a way of stopping the conversation. So there are preparedness strikes, there are Preparedness Day marches all across the country. The hot one is going to be San Francisco, because in San Francisco, the Preparedness Day bombing is being managed by the Chamber of Commerce. And the Chamber of Commerce doesn't want to have the unions to have anything to do with it. They want to go ahead and list the Chamber of Commerce and the Preparedness Day and the open shop all together, so that if you show your support by showing up at the parade, you're also showing your support for the open shop campaign. The unions are not going to have one contingent at all in the parade. So the unions know that the Chamber of Commerce is running it, so the unions are going to have their own anti-Preparedness Day parade, and they couldn't get enough people for the parade, so they had a rally. And they had a rally, I believe it's in Golden Gate Park, I'm not sure. And everything was going along really well, and there's always somebody that upsets the apple cart. And they had one of the speakers there by the name of McDevitt, and McDevitt got up and began giving a speech, and he began saying that the best way to stop the war is for people who get drafted to go ahead and shoot their officers. And, well, you can imagine how well that went over. And this was the day before the Preparedness Day bombing. On the day of the Preparedness Day bombing, your parade starts out down here at the end of Market Street and proceeds up. And at 2 o'clock, what happens, a bomb goes off at the corner of Stewart and Market Street down here. Okay, almost immediately you have 20 people who are killed, immediately you have about 100 who are injured. The entire city is in a panic. Nobody knows what is going to happen. There have been bombings across the United States. There's nobody claiming credit for this. And everybody begins to look for, who are we going to get this? Who's going to pay for this? Okay, and if you have the Chamber of Commerce, and the Chamber of Commerce is connected to the Attorney General's office, the Attorney General is going to get somebody, and who do you think that they're going to get? They're going to get somebody in the labor union. Okay, this is one of the shots of the Preparedness Day bombing, and that's where the bomb actually went off. And what we'll do is they will go ahead and they will arrest 2 union people. This is, on the left is Warren Billings, and on the right is Tom Mooney. And this is going to be the cause célèbre of the labor unions for the next 30 years. These guys are going to be arrested. They're going to be run through a trial. They're going to have derelicts saying, I saw him down at the corner there putting the bomb in. And these guys are going to be found guilty, and they're going to be sent to San Quentin. They're going to spend 30 years on death row. They're going to be there until the late 30s. And year by year, as the case moves forward, more and more information is coming out. There are at least 3 federal examinations into this case, and there are also massive rallies all across the country. This is the Law and Order Committee here. They are pumping up support for the Mooney and Billings trial. They want to make sure that these guys go to jail, and they also want to kill the open shop. And this is ads, full-page ads that are appearing. Law and Order, we've got to get rid of these guys. We've got to get rid of the labor unions. We've got to make this an open shop city, because if we don't make it an open shop city, what we're going to do is we're going to have more of these bombings and, Law and Order, just like what happened last night with Donald Trump, that there's more of these disasters coming. And here is a parade as late as the 1930s demanding the release of Tom Mooney and Warren Billings. And I found one from San Francisco. And this is a San Francisco meeting to go ahead and have Tom Mooney and Warren Billings released. This particular picture is incredibly important, because by the time you get to the 1930s, everybody is saying that Tom Mooney wasn't even at the bombing. and nobody would listen to anybody, and after 30 years, what happened is his wife came forward with a photo. And this photo shows Tom Mooney up on, this is what really finally released him. The third character on the right that you see with the hair is Tom Mooney. This was taken by his wife. And if you look on about the middle of the photo, you'll see a white arrow. And that white arrow is pointing to a clock. And so what happened is they have a picture of Tom Mooney looking at the parade, and they've got the time on the clock where you see that white arrow. And that was what finally tipped it to get Tom Mooney out of prison. Now, to this day, we don't really know what happened. We don't really know who set off the bomb. No one has ever come forward. The most likely suspect to this day is this man right here. And this man is named Alexander Berkman. Alexander Berkman ran a radical newspaper here in San Francisco, and you have a cover of one of his news articles. Alexander Berkman is an anarchist. He was, in 1880, he went and tried to assassinate this guy. That's James Clay Frick. Frick was the partner of Andrew Carnegie. And it was during the Homestead strike, and Alexander Berkman walked into the hotel where James Clay Frick was and fired at him point blank range and missed. So he goes to jail for 20 years. He gets out. He's a radical. He wants to go ahead and start a radical newspaper worshiping the explosions of dynamite, and that's the cover. If you'll take a look at the logo, the blast, that's a dynamite blast. That's the logo of his paper. And he's coming to San Francisco. Why did he come to San Francisco? Good question. To this day, nobody knows, but we do know he was in San Francisco, and he was editing a paper called The Blast, which you've got there, which advocates, I think you have that there. This is the first item in the paper on the first day that he published it, and it's there if you can't, you can read it pretty well clear. And it's pretty clear what he's talking about. He is talking about blowing things up. This is not a nonviolent newspaper. This is a newspaper that's advocating violence, advocating bombs going off. And a bomb does go off, and so what happens is everybody begins looking at Alexander Berkman as being the most likely guy to have set the bomb off. They raided his office, they raided his home, they looked at all his files, they found nothing. To this day, they have found nothing. Okay, so far what you've heard is kind of the history of the Preparedness Day bombing. 100 years ago today, but the key is, great, you've told a story about the Preparedness Day bombing, that's nice, it's a piece of history. How does it affect the rest of the country? This is just a bomb that went off. Well, the bomb goes off on July 22nd. Okay, a month later, Charles Evans Hughes is coming to town. Charles Evans Hughes is coming to town as part of his westward swing running for President of the United States. He's running against Woodrow Wilson. Nobody was particularly upset at Charles Evans Hughes. Everybody was upset at Woodrow Wilson. Woodrow Wilson was stalling a whole bunch of things that people wanted done. Okay, you've got some of the most important issues of the century are on the table in Washington, D.C., and nothing is happening. There's the women's right to vote. There's income tax. There is popular election of senators. There's the 8-hour day. You have the regulation of the railroads, and these things are all sitting in Congress, and the president isn't pushing them, and everybody's saying to the president, start pushing. This is important stuff, and the president isn't doing anything at all. Okay, Charles Evans Hughes is coming to town saying things like, we should be moving forward on giving women the rights to vote, the 8-hour day. I mean, he looks to be like a very, very positive, pro-union candidate. He shows up in San Francisco, and in San Francisco, the last thing in the world he wants to do is upset the union. San Francisco is a union town. Okay? He is arriving in San Francisco right after the Preparedness Day bombing. You've got widespread hysteria. You've got the Chamber of Commerce running around talking about the open shop. It is a very unsafe place for a politician to be. Charles Evans Hughes comes to town, and the first thing he says is, I don't want to upset the unions. Okay? That's fine. The people who are sponsoring him in San Francisco are the Chamber of Commerce. The Chamber of Commerce wants to make sure that Charles Evans Hughes appears to be supporting the open shop campaign. So what they're going to do is they're going to go ahead and they're going to put him in, have him have a luncheon at the San Francisco Commercial Club. And I don't know if that still exists, but that's where he was supposed to be having his lunch, in the middle of a strike where you have the culinary workers on strike. Culinary workers show up and they talk to Hughes and they say, we don't want any problems here. You look like you're going to be a candidate who's going to be at least friendly to union. So we'll tell you what we'll do. What we'll do is we will go ahead and have you served with union people even though the restaurant is on strike. But there's only one thing we want. We want you to take down the plaque that's in the window that says this is an open shop restaurant. Okay? And the union said, you take down the plaque, we'll serve you with union waiters, union cooks, and there won't be a problem. And the Chamber of Commerce says no. The Chamber of Commerce says no, but they didn't say no right away. They kind of said, we're thinking about it, and it's under consideration. And who knows? The moon's in the wrong quadrant. And 2 hours, 3 hours before the luncheon, the Chamber finally comes back and says, no, we're not going to take down the plaque. So the unions don't serve Hughes. Hughes gets served by Strikebreakers. The next day, all of the union papers all across San Francisco are talking about how Charles Evans Hughes is anti-union. The election comes up. Hughes will lose San Francisco by 15,000 votes. He'll lose California by 3,000 votes. When California goes to Woodrow Wilson, that's the swing state, Woodrow Wilson wins the presidency. So you want to talk about how important local issues are? Local issues are very important because in this particular case, what you ended up with is a president of the United States because somebody had what I call it the most expensive meal in American history. Okay, the labor unions today are in the same place now that they were 100 years ago. Right now, we are in the same place we've been 100 years ago. Right now, if you're in the middle class right now, you have not seen yourself advance financially at all in the last 5 to 6 years. Okay, we don't call it the open shop anymore. We call it the right to work. Right to work campaigns are going on all across the country. Okay, you've got it's already up there. You also have a Supreme Court that's split 4-4 right now. One of the things that happened is this particular case, the unions were able to win because of a 4-4 split. Okay, and that wasn't just dodging the bullet, that was dodging a howitzer shell. Is because what will happen is if you have a ruling against the union like this one, it will send the unions back 100 years. Nothing has changed in 100 years. And I want to finish up by where I started is that history is a tool. And if you don't use it properly, what will happen is that you will not profit from it. Okay, and I thank you very much for listening. Do you have any questions?